Everybody knows that something is fishy in the Joni Lamb family drama, and new revelations are coming to light that are absolutely explosive. We're talking about the beach house incident, the one that's been whispered about, the one that seems to connect all the dots between Jonathan's firing, the GPS tracker, and why this family completely imploded. Well, more details are finally being revealed, and trust me, this is bigger than we thought. Hi everyone, if you're new here, please remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel because this story keeps developing and you're not going to want to miss what comes next. Now let's continue, because what we're learning about that beach house trip is frankly disturbing and it explains so much about why Jonathan and Susie have been so adamant about speaking out despite all the pressure to stay silent. So we already knew there was tension in the family, right? We already knew Jonathan had concerns about how things were being handled at Daystar after Marcus died. But what we're learning now is that those concerns go way deeper than just ministry disagreements or succession planning. This beach house trip we're talking about, this was supposed to be a normal family vacation, the Lambs and some close friends getting away, relaxing, doing the usual beach activities. But here's what you need to understand. Before anyone even packed their bags, there were already serious warnings being issued behind the scenes. Rebecca and JW, who you've heard mentioned in other parts of the story, had been watching a man named Pete, someone very close to the family, someone Marcus and Joni trusted completely, and they didn't like what they were seeing. We're not talking about general discomfort or personality conflicts. We're talking about specific behavioral concerns around children, red flags that made them alarmed enough to pull Jonathan and Susie aside before the trip and explicitly tell them, do not let Pete near this young family member. Think about how serious your concerns have to be to issue that kind of warning to family members before a vacation. They weren't being dramatic or overprotective, they were genuinely worried about a child's safety. And here's where it gets even more intense. Rebecca, JW, and a woman named Denise Boggs didn't just warn Jonathan and Susie. They prayed together specifically that if something was wrong with Pete, if their concerns were legitimate, that God would reveal it during this beach trip. They were essentially asking for divine confirmation, for the truth to come out in an undeniable way, so this wouldn't just remain in the realm of suspicion and whispers. They wanted clarity, and they wanted it badly enough to pray for an exposure moment. Well, according to what Susie has now shared, that prayer got answered in the most unsettling way possible. At some point during the trip, Pete started acting strangely. Susie described it as him being in a trance, which is already a disturbing detail. Then here's what happened. Susie had told the young girl to go upstairs and get changed, just a normal instruction during a beach day. But Pete followed her. He followed this child upstairs after she'd been sent to change clothes. When Susie realized what was happening, she didn't hesitate. She ran down to the basement where Jonathan was and got him immediately. Jonathan bolted upstairs to intervene, to physically get between Pete and this child, and what followed was a confrontation that would change the entire family dynamic forever. Now we don't have every detail of what Jonathan said to Pete in that moment, but we know there was a direct confrontation, and we know it was serious enough that a full family meeting had to be called afterward. Everyone needed to understand what had just happened, what had been witnessed, what Pete had done or tried to do. But here's where this story takes the turn that's been haunting Jonathan and Susie ever since. Marcus and Joni Lamb reportedly struggled to believe the allegations. And I want you to really sit with that for a moment because this is crucial to understanding everything that came after. Multiple family members had warned about Pete beforehand. They had prayed for revelation. An incident occurred that seemed to confirm their worst fears. Jonathan personally intervened to protect a child. And yet when it came time to address what happened, Marcus and Joni didn't immediately side with protecting the child or taking the allegations seriously. They went into defense mode for Pete. Marcus, according to Jonathan and Susie, immediately declared Pete innocent. He didn't say, let's investigate this thoroughly, or we need to get to the bottom of this, or the safety of this child is our top priority. He said Pete was innocent, and he compared the accusations to times he himself had been falsely accused in the past. essentially framing the whole situation as good people being unfairly attacked rather than as a legitimate safety concern that needed proper investigation. You can imagine how that response landed with Jonathan and Susie, with Rebecca and JW, with everyone who had witnessed what happened or had been raising concerns. This wasn't just disappointing, this was devastating. This was Marcus Lamb, the founder of Daystar, a man who preached about truth and righteousness, choosing to protect his friend over addressing serious allegations involving a child. And this decision, this immediate defense of Pete without investigation, divided the family for weeks. You had people on one side saying, "We saw what we saw. This needs to be taken seriously. This child's safety matters more than anyone's reputation." And you had Marcus and Joni on the other side essentially saying, "You're wrong. Pete is innocent. This is a false accusation." That's not a minor disagreement about interpretation. That's a fundamental split about whose version of reality is accepted, whose concerns are valid, whose observations matter. For Jonathan and Susie, this was the moment they realized that speaking truth within the Lamb family, raising concerns about dangerous behavior, wasn't going to be met with gratitude or protective action. It was going to be met with resistance and accusations that they were the problem. Now what happened next is what really gets into cover-up territory, and this is what's been alleged by multiple people who were close to the situation. Instead of launching a proper investigation into Pete's behavior, instead of bringing in outside experts to interview the child and assess whether there was a pattern of concerning conduct, Marcus and Joni apparently decided to contain the situation. Contain is the operative word here, not investigate, not expose, not address, but contain. Keep it in the family. Don't let it become public. Manage who knows what. Control the narrative. This is classic institutional cover-up behavior, the same pattern we've seen in countless church scandals and ministry failures. When something uncomfortable surfaces, when allegations arise that could damage reputations or complicate relationships, the instinct for leaders without proper accountability is often to suppress rather than investigate. To protect the institution rather than protect potential victims. The podcast that's been covering this story has explicitly accused Daystar leadership and the Lamb family of fostering this kind of cover-up culture, and the beach house incident seems to be the clearest example of that pattern in action. And can we talk about Rebecca's moment during one of these family meetings? Because this detail is absolutely wild and shows you how intense the spiritual warfare aspect of this became. Rebecca reportedly walked into one of these meetings praying loudly, not quiet, private prayer but full-volume spiritual warfare, calling out for truth to be exposed, demanding that what was hidden be brought into the light. She was declaring that this confrontation, this family crisis, was exactly what they had prayed would happen. Remember, before the beach trip, they had specifically asked God to reveal the truth if Pete was dangerous. Now here they were in the aftermath of an incident that seemed to answer that prayer, and Rebecca was essentially saying, "This is it. This is the divine revelation we asked for. You can't dismiss this or minimize this because God orchestrated this exposure." For Rebecca, this wasn't just family drama to be managed. This was a spiritual battle between truth and deception, between protecting the innocent and enabling the guilty. Her dramatic entrance and loud prayers were her way of refusing to let the moment be swept under the rug, of insisting that everyone recognize the seriousness of what God had allegedly revealed. But here's what's really damning. Despite all of this, despite the warnings, the incident, the confrontation, the family meetings, the prayers, the accusations, Pete was never subjected to a full forensic investigation. Debbie Leonard, who's been described as a professional involved in the case, apparently requested that Pete be properly investigated by experts who know how to handle these kinds of allegations. We're talking about forensic interviews with the child, examination of Pete's history and patterns, assessment by trained professionals who can determine whether someone poses a genuine threat. That's the standard protocol when serious allegations involving children surface. But it never happened. Marcus and Joni shut down those requests. Internal discussions about Pete were forbidden. Questions were discouraged. And no public statement was ever made about the incident or about Pete's status within the family and Daystar. The decision not to investigate is perhaps the most revealing detail in this entire saga because it shows a deliberate choice to avoid finding out the truth. If Pete was truly innocent, if the allegations were really just misunderstandings or false accusations, why wouldn't you want a thorough investigation to prove that definitively and clear his name? The only reason to refuse investigation is if you're afraid of what that investigation might find or confirm. Then Marcus Lamb died, and with his death, any possibility of him reconsidering how he'd handled the beach house situation died too. Whatever Marcus really thought about Pete, whatever doubts he might have privately had, whatever he might have eventually been willing to acknowledge about mishandling the allegations, all of that is gone now. But the issues he left behind didn't disappear. The family remained divided. Jonathan and Joni's relationship continued to deteriorate. And without Marcus as a buffer or potential mediator, the conflicts that had been simmering since the beach house incident only got worse. This is the context you need to understand for everything that came after: the power struggle at Daystar, Jonathan being pushed out, the GPS tracker being placed on his car, the private investigators, the board manipulation, all of it. These weren't random acts of corporate warfare. These were the culmination of a family that had fractured over how to handle serious allegations and whose leadership had chosen institutional protection over accountability. Which brings us to the NDA situation that we've talked about before, but now you can see it in fuller context. After Jonathan was fired from Daystar, after he discovered he was being tracked, after the family relationship had completely fallen apart, the Daystar board, stacked with Joni's loyalists, remember, pressured Jonathan to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You already know this part, but what's significant is what that NDA would have covered. It wasn't just about Daystar's business operations or financial information. It would have prevented Jonathan from ever speaking publicly about the beach house incident, about Pete, about the alleged cover-up, about how his parents had handled the situation, all of it. The NDA was essentially an attempt to buy Jonathan's silence about everything he knew regarding dysfunction and potential danger within the Lamb family and Daystar organization. But Jonathan refused. He told them he could not and would not stay silent about what he knew. And this refusal is why we're hearing these stories now, why the beach house incident has come to light, why we know about the surveillance and the family betrayal and the cover-up culture. Jonathan made a choice to prioritize truth over family loyalty, transparency over legal protection, and that choice has allowed all of us to see what was really happening behind the scenes at one of Christian television's biggest networks. So, where does this leave us with the developing story? Well, the beach house incident is no longer just a rumor or a vague reference. It's becoming a documented part of the narrative about what went wrong in the Lamb family. It's the origin point of the betrayal Jonathan and Susie experienced. It's the moment when they realized that raising legitimate safety concerns would be met not with investigation and protection, but with denial and eventual retaliation. It's the incident that revealed a pattern of prioritizing reputation and relationships over accountability and child safety. And it's the context that makes everything else, the tracking, the firing, the board manipulation, the refusal to sign the NDA, make complete sense as part of a larger story about power, control, and what happens when Christian leaders choose image over integrity. This story is still developing, more details are continuing to emerge, and Jonathan and Susie are still speaking out despite enormous pressure to stay quiet. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any updates as this situation continues to unfold and as we learn more about what really happened within the Lamb family and Daystar leadership.